This is an audio short story, No Matter What, by Jim Pope, read by Quack McMullard, Chapter 11.
No Matter What, Chapter 11. Lizzie woke to her alarm at 7 in the morning. She needed an alarm these days to get her going in the morning, as work no longer gave her a reason to start the day. It was now something she did for money, which a lot of people do their whole lives, but it was a new thing for Lizzie. Her work had been her life. It was the thing that got her going each day, and she enjoyed it. As she felt around for the alarm, she felt a sharp sting. She opened her eyes to see what it was and saw the rose. She jumped out of bed and quickly checked the house before returning to her bedroom. She sat on the side of the bed, picked up the rose and put it near her face to see if it had a scent, and then picked up the note. She opened the envelope and read the note. It only said, "Miss you." She looked on the back of the note to see if there was anything else, a signature, but nothing. She took the rose to the kitchen and placed it in a vase before getting on with her day. Janet was making breakfast a bit late, as she worked a 4-day week, and this was her day off. There was a knock at the door. She answered it to find it was Lizzie. "Hi," said Lizzie. "Hello, Lizzie," Janet replied, and then, "We were only talking about you last night." "We? Has he been here?" said Lizzie. Well, he might have been," replied Janet, and then, "Come on in, would you like a cup of tea?" "No thanks, I'm on my way to work," said Lizzie, and then added, "Is he still here?" "No, he left about 11 last night," replied Janet. She continued, "But I'm sure if you put your mind to it, you can find him." "I've been trying," said Lizzie. "Well, try harder," replied Janet. Lizzie walked back to her car and headed to work. As Paul drove through the night, the car's exhaust humming and the music turned up loud, he had time to think. Too much time. He could not get the image of Lizzie lying on her bed in the moonlight out of his head. He started to feel sorry for himself and to spiral down into depression. So he turned the music up even louder, sang along with it, but that did not help. He eventually gave himself a stiff talking to. He told himself to make the best of things and to get on with it. By the time he got home, he was so exhausted he just wanted to sleep. While standing in Janet's front door, Lizzie noticed a picture on the wall. It was of Paul standing next to his Ford Escort. The Escort may be something he could not let go of. This got her thinking. Maybe she could track him down via the Escort. Once she got to work, she searched the police database for Ford Escort owners. She narrowed it down to blue Escorts, then narrowed it down again to owners that lived in country areas. The computer came up with a list of 18 names spread over the state. Over the next few months, Lizzie started going away for the weekend to country areas, checking out the owners of blue Ford Escorts. She would drive to country towns, stay overnight at a motel. She would then keep an eye on the addresses on her list of Ford Escort owners, slowly working her way through the list in the hope of finding Paul. Her superiors had told her to let it go and work on her current list of crimes, so she was doing this at her own expense and in her own time. She was halfway through the list and was not getting anywhere when she had an idea. She asked herself, how did Paul get his false IDs? But she had no answer. Lizzie sought advice from her old mentor, now retired, former Detective Sergeant Steve Campbell. She went to see him at his home, where he lived alone, having never married. He only retired a few years earlier, but she was shocked to see him. He was a shadow of his former self. It was like he had nothing to live for, spending most of his time in the garden. As Lizzie sat in his lounge room, she had an awful thought. Is this me in a few years? So, Elizabeth, "Why have you come to visit today?" asked Steve. And then, "How can I help you?" "I just came to see how you were," said Lizzie, but Steve was having none of it. "No, you didn't," Steve replied. "How does someone go about getting a new identity?" asked Lizzie. "For yourself, Lizzie?" asked Steve. "No, of course not. I'm trying to find someone, and I thought if I knew how he got his new identity, I might be able to track him down," said Lizzie. "In the old days," well, he paused for a moment, "you'd go to the state library and look up old newspapers for someone who had died young. You'd then go back further and look for their parents' marriage. What you're looking for is the mother's maiden name, the father's name, date of birth, all the information you can get. Once you have that, you can get a birth certificate, and with that you can get a driver's license, bank accounts, whatever you want," explained Steve. "I see," said Lizzie. "Do you know when this person set up the false identities?" asked Steve. "Roughly, yes," said Lizzie. "Okay, just go to the state library and get them to tell you who was looking at old newspapers around that date. It won't be that big a list, and if he's on that list, ask them to show you the material he was looking at," explained Steve. "He is a Ford Escort enthusiast, and I've got a list of owners," said Lizzie. "Just cross-reference that list with the people who died young listed in the newspapers, and with a bit of luck, a name will jump out at you," replied Steve. "Thanks," said Lizzie, and then as they walked towards the door, "Nice place you have here. You were never any good at small talk. I see you haven't improved," replied Steve. Lizzie just smiled. "Don't be a stranger," Steve said, and then just looked at her and added, "And don't end up like me, Elizabeth." Lizzie gave a half-hearted smile and walked away. The next day, Lizzie took the day off work and spent a lot of time at the state library looking at old newspapers, and her patience paid off. One of the names on her list of Ford Escort owners and someone who died as a child in 1962 matched. She spent the next few days trying to work out what to do. Should she arrest him or should she do nothing? She decided to go and check that it was him. That weekend Lizzie drove to Kempsey and then followed the navman's instructions, which took her about an hour west. A few kilometres outside Bellbrook, she arrived at her destination. She turned into his driveway, and after a few 100 metres, she found herself outside a small house. She got out of the car and knocked on the door, but there was no answer. So she walked around the house, only to find no one was about. She walked to the shed and looked through the window and saw a familiar blue Ford Escort. So she went back to the house and tried the front door. It was unlocked. So she went inside. On the wall there was a picture of Paul and Janet, so she knew she was in the right place. Then she noticed a framed press clipping of her, which made her smile. She made herself a cup of coffee and sat on the lounge and just waited. Lizzie was only halfway through her coffee when she heard a car pull up outside. She just stayed where she was and waited. Paul came through the front door and looked over at her, smiled and said, "What took you so long, Lizzie?"
Copyright 2022. To read more, go to www.yellowduckmotorsport.com. Click on Books,